Welcome to week 79 of Misha Dianne watch Santa Barbara.
I was saving my grandchild, Cece.
It is Monday, January 27th, 1986.
Well, I like what you
And
offer
over the
him in
weekend,
return.
I saw my first Doctor
A
Who,
chance to be raised by
City of
carnal
Death.
nomads.
Tom Baker, Lalla Ward, and written by Douglas Adams. This may be the best show in the history of television. And thus begun my 30-some-odd year fascination with Doctor Who. Now, you, in 1986, were not in Vancouver yet. Were you getting Doctor Who on any station?
Well, I had actually started watching Doctor Who as a kid. They used to have it on KVOS, which was broadcast from Bellingham. And they also used to have it on CKVS. No, CK.
KCPQ? I don't know. I want
Anyway.
from here.
Anyway, sorry, I don't
KVOS is the one that I saw it on.
don't have the call number quite right.
CHCH. Oh, that's Toronto.
But anyway, it was mainly from KVOS, and I started watching it in the late 1970s.
Much sooner than me.
Yeah. So I was already very familiar with Doctor Who by this time. But no, I was still in high school at this point in 1986.
I remember I would start watching it. It started at 11. Sometimes it started later. And sometimes they'd be 2 hours long, and sometimes they'd be 3 hours long or 3.5 hours long. I just couldn't understand how they could make a 3.5-hour show every week in the UK. That was one weird thing. Plus, of course, they edited out in reality, they only did a half-hour a week, and the stories were many weeks long. But, of course, we saw the edited-together versions from KVOS, so the cliffhangers were removed. So they had a weird, surreal quality sometimes because of the way the editing was, too. And, of course, City of Death was one of the more bonkers stories that they had. So, what else was going on in January of 1986 other than me skipping classes to watch Santa Barbara? Movies of January 1986. Rocky IV, which had come out in November, was still popular. The Color Purple. Spies Like Us. Back to the Future, which had come out in July, was still running. Clue from December 13th. And the only January movie I remember seeing was Clan of the Cave Bear.
And I think when you were reading this list to me, you mentioned Pretty in Pink, which was the one I remember
it didn't come up on the
seeing.
list that I looked at now, so it might be coming up later in the year. A lot of horror movies seem to show up on the list. Maybe that's when they dump them into the theaters. Songs, just a random sampling from the top 30 of last week. That's What Friends Are For, Dionne Warwick and Friends. Say You, Say Me, Lionel Richie. Party All the Time, Eddie Murphy. Spies Like Us, Paul McCartney, which makes sense since the movie was still in the theaters. Walk of Life, Dire Straits. How Will I Know, Whitney Houston. And in episode 381 of Santa Barbara, Gina walks out of the Capwell house naked. Kelly wants to go after her, but Cece stops her. She ends up going anyway, but by the time she's out there, Gina is gone. Kirk Cranston having shown up in the driveway and picked her up. And he does not take her to his apartment. He does not take her to the winery that we haven't seen since the day he bought a winery. He takes her to a seedy motel and gives her a trench coat that he has in the trunk. She says, "I'll never trust a man who keeps a trench coat in his trunk." She wants to go back. Tell everyone that Eden pulled Cece's plug. But Kirk ends up talking through it with her that that's not going to end well for anyone involved. But she's very angry and she just wants to blow everything up. But he manages to talk her out of it.
And they do have a really amusing little scene where they're having this huge argument in the hallway. And, the manager, whatever, the hotel comes up and tries to intervene, and Gina convinces him that it's just basically rough trade sex they're having. So
yeah. So it'll be interesting. Will there ever be something romantic between Kirk and Gina in reality?
Well, they definitely seem to be on the same wavelength. They seem very similar in a lot of ways, and they definitely understand each other, I would say.
Kirk is quite clear he does not want her to go after Eden in any way. But he tries to get her to focus on what she wants, and not revenge on Eden, but everything else. And she says she wants to move back into the Capwell mansion with Brandon. And I think the way she puts it is, I want to be there the day Cece dies, or something like that. Kirk gives her a bit of money to buy some clothes, and some more to have a car bring Brandon to the motel. Apparently he's staying with friends. I don't know who these friends are. Maybe Sally has been babysitting Brandon for free. I don't know. Brandon gets there eventually and wonders what that smell is. And, as Gina puts him to bed, he says, "Oh, we're going to go back home soon."
Yeah, it's kind of, a little bit bittersweet, because I guess Brandon's happy to be with his mom, but it's not in the best surroundings. And I think it does kind of, back up perhaps in some ways Santana's point that kicking Gina out of the house but giving her Brandon is not necessarily going to ensure this fabulous upbringing that CC keeps saying he's going to ensure that Brandon has. And that's not necessarily on Gina per se, but if she has no money, it's going to be hard, and he keeps saying he's going to give Brandon the best schools or whatever, but, certainly in this sort of day-to-day situation, it's not really great for Brandon at this point.
Brick tells Cruz that he's starting his new job at the casino tomorrow, which is a shocker because the oil rig had a couple of buckets of maybe some kind of paint. I don't know, it was those big white drums that usually glue is in, maybe wood paneling paste or something. I don't know can't remember what the decor of the casino is from all those years ago. But it certainly does not look ready to open tomorrow. Cruz decides to confront Cece about who pulled the plug, and he runs back to the Capwell house, at one point zipping past Gina and Kirk, who duck so that he doesn't spot them together. Kirk says, that we really cannot be seen together, by the way. Kirk plays Cece the tape, and he's not really interested. He wants...
Cruz plays Cece.
Cruz plays CC the tape he made of himself reading Gina's script, and the words don't seem to ring a bell with CC. And he says, "Why don't you just burn all the evidence you have and drop the case?" And Cruz says, "Well, I'm not even on the case, and I think someone else might, be the perpetrator." But CC says, "Well, you don't have a suspect, then what's the point?" I think he just wants it to end. Cruz gets angry with Cece and actually says the whole thing is his fault for asking Eden to pull his plug in the first place. And she says, you basically asked her to kill herself. So he's extremely angry. And he runs into Eden on the way out the door and says that he's not going to have anything to do with the Capwells anymore.
And one thing we should note is that Eden is actually at the door. This entire exchange he's having with Cece.
That's true. She's listening
and she's overhearing it. And I think those words that Cruz was reading actually did seem a bit familiar to her.
That's
so
right,
it's possible she might be putting this together a little bit. And as well, I felt that there was a bit of resonance with her when Cruz was basically blasting CC for putting her in this terrible situation. It kind of is a bit of a callback to the conversation that CC and Eden themselves were having. I think it was in the last episode, about where CC was basically saying he shouldn't have put her in that situation. So I'm wondering if overhearing that conversation is maybe putting things in a little different light for Eden.
Kelly tells Cece that she's going to New York to think things through, and he says, "Nope, you got to stay here. You're running the casino tomorrow, or you have to oversee the opening or something." So I think it is tomorrow somehow. He says, "Just treat Dylan as any old coworker." So that's some helpful love advice from CC Capwell.
It's not very practical, really, but
Sophia returns the guest house keys to Cece. He says, "Oh, you could have just left these downstairs." He tells her to go be with Lionel and Brick and not to see any of his children. Cruz goes home and Santana finds him down by the sea. She says Cece disappointed both of them tonight. She asked Cruz if he meant what he said to Eden, because she was with him at the time. This actually happened a bit later, because it's actually a scene where Santana talks to Cece that I actually have coming up later. Maybe I'll move this down and say it again. Cece tells Eden he wouldn't have missed Gina's exit for the world, and Mason is next. Eden tells him to remember that he is his son. Cece says revenge is one of the bigger pleasures in life. So we'll see what Cece has in store for Mason.
yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of revenge to go around, and I'm wondering, I can certainly think of, there's probably a lot of ways Cece could get revenge on Mason, but I'm not entirely clear what he's seeking revenge for exactly. So, whereas with Gina, she was a little more specific about her revenge and in taking away from everyone the one thing they love the most, which I'm assuming in Mason's case will mean perhaps coming between Mason and Mary. But with CC, it seems to be a little more free-ranging revenge.
And he suddenly remembers he's got some other revenge to worry about. He calls Minx Lockridge in a hilarious one-sided conversation, which says, "Oh, no, I did tell your maid who it was, and, oh, you're not available to speak to me? Okay, well, I do have to talk to the DA about a 25-year-old kidnapping kid. Oh, you are available. Okay, well, tomorrow, not too early." And I think, is she coming there, or is he going?
He's going there, I
He's
believe.
going there.
And I'm so looking forward to that.
Minx and Cece. Yes, this will be great, I think. I'm really excited to see this conversation between Cece and Minx about the swapped son that he got. Santana barges in to see Cece and mentions to him that he shouldn't even care about Brandon because Cece wasn't even his son. In fact, he was the son of circus people. Of course, behind her in the room are Mason, Ted, Kelly, and Eden, and they all find out that their brother Channing was really Barnaby Wallace, and that their real brother is Brick Wallace.
And this is actually, chronologically, she kind of bursts in during the conversation that Cece is having with Sophia. So Sophia is there as well to confirm everything, so to back up everything Santana is saying.
Yeah, Cece kind of fills a lot of it in. Well, makes Lockridge switch the babies, etc., etc. Mason phones Brick and says, "Oh, can you bring over that documentation about the casino numbers? Kelly needs it for the morning." So Brick's a little surprised to be called in so late at night, but he agrees. Sophia is also hanging out downstairs with the family. Ted says that he'll miss Channing anyway, and Mason says he was never really gone. Kelly asks Eden why she married Kirk, because she's trying to figure out how to make her own decision. And Eden tells her, contrary to what Cece told them as children, their dreams won't all come true just because they're Capwells. So that's not really that helpful to Kelly in making her decision.
No, she's really commenting more on her own miserable situation with Kirk, obviously.
And after enough patting, Brick shows up. And everyone, of course, is downstairs as he comes in, so that's handy. And he soon realizes that the numbers weren't really that, high priority, and that the way everyone's treating him, he realizes they all know that he's their half-brother. And Sophia says she's sorry that they had to find out about it that way. Cece pops up at the top of the stairs and says, "I thought I told you to get out of my house, Sophia." And Brick is very angry with the way Cece is treating Sophia. And he says, "You're lucky I wasn't raised in this house." Cece says, "What do you want?" And Brick says, You'll have to wait and find out, like everybody else. So I wonder if that's just something Brick threw out, or if he actually has now got an idea of what he might want from the Capwells and the Lockridges.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. But it was, I found this whole interaction quite fascinating because none of the kids really know quite how to approach it, and I don't think Brick does either. But from the conversation they're having before he arrives, Ted and Kelly especially are saying, well, it must have been really hard for him and we'll have to talk to him. So I think there will be a possibility of them building some relationships. I was surprised it was Mason who phoned him to bring him over, which makes me wonder if perhaps Mason's already got some schemes going on in his head involving Brick, because he is actually the only one not related to him.
Well, one thing I'm wondering is some of the Capwell holdings something that was inherited from Cece's father?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps there's something in Cece's father's will about his grandchildren inheriting, and Mason is going to try to make the claim that Channing's shares really should all be Brick's. And that way, if Mason and Brick are buddy-buddy, that Brick should be on the board, and hopefully we'll be voting with Mason. That's what I'm thinking, because that's kind of the...
That's what I thought, too, because I'm assuming Channing's shares are floating around somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
We know Channing has a university or a school or something named after him. That was mentioned in one episode. So, that was really interesting to me. And the other thing that I thought was interesting, I'll be really interested to see how that relationship between Brick and Cece kind of unfolds. But in this episode, they were giving each other no quarter. And in some ways, I thought that Cece was almost treating Brick the way he treats Mason. So it's going to be some really interesting dynamics to watch going forward.
It'll be interesting to see Brick battling against Cece, because he doesn't really have anything to lose, does he?
No, not at all. And it was interesting. All of the siblings, I think, are going to be kind of watching him, because that was something they were speculating on during the episode. Was, well, what would it have been like if he had been raised as our brother, and would he have ended up like the fake Channing, or would he have been his own person? And I think everyone's kind of feeling each other out.
Yeah, it'll be nice to see as each person gets to know Brick a little more now, knowing that he's their half-brother, or I guess non-brother in Mason's case.
And also Brick getting to know himself, because that's something he's talked about a lot, how he used to be very comfortable in who he was, and now his whole life is being turned upside down.
I mean, the fact that we'll never see the Wallaces again maybe gives us an idea of which direction he'll go. And then, of course, at the end of the day, this is when Santana finds Cruz down by the waterfront, contemplating life with the Capwells, and she says that Cece disappointed both of them tonight, and she asks if Cruz meant what he said to Eden about just never seeing the Capwells again, which was ideal for Santana, I think, and I think, she's been waiting for that. I think she realized she couldn't just ask him to cut Eden out of his life immediately. She's been pretty, laid back about that, because they literally were just together, So...
And there was actually a very pivotal, just a very small thing at the very end, when Eden actually came down, as Cruz and Santana had sort of officially left, but she came down because I think she wanted to talk to Cruz perhaps a little bit more about what she had overheard and what he actually thought might have happened when Cece was almost killed. And she comes down and asks if she can talk to him, and Cruz is with Santana, and he says, maybe later. And then he leaves with Santana. So it's like he's making a very clear and definitive choice.
Yep. Well, we'll see if there's a casino tomorrow that everyone will be at the grand opening of. We'll see how the staff is dressed, and if they have little uniforms, or if they're all in tuxedos.
All I can think is that when we saw Nick and Dylan in that kind of shabby, grubby. Maybe it was the lower level. Maybe the upper level is all beautiful. And so we don't know. Maybe when Nick and Dylan were fighting it out in the last episode, or two episodes ago, maybe they weren't in the part of the casino where people are actually going to be visiting. Maybe they were just, down in, I don't know if there's an engine room or whatever in an old oil rig, but maybe they were not in the part of the oil rig where they were actually going to have the posh casino.
Mm-hmm. Looking forward to seeing that, and looking forward to Cece confronting Minx. So, and tomorrow's a Tuesday, so I don't have classes all day. I think I just have one. And so I'm going to sleep in. And then maybe skip class and watch Santa Barbara. We will see you on Tuesday, January 28th, 1986. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Honey, revenge is one of the bigger pleasures in life.
And liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Engines throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
Challenger, go at throttle up. Flight controllers here looking very carefully at the situation. Obviously a major malfunction. We have a report from the flight dynamics officer that the vehicle has exploded. Flight director confirms that. We are looking at checking with the recovery forces to see what can be done at this point. Contingency procedures are in effect.
It's Tuesday, January 28th, 1986. I was sleeping in, and suddenly my roommate came banging on my door, telling me to wake up because the Space Shuttle Challenger had exploded shortly after takeoff. So, as you can imagine, I probably took that as another excuse not to go to school that day, and we ended up watching the coverage all day, and of course Santa Barbara was preempted that day. Do you recall that event?
I do. I don't think it was something we watched live here in Canada, but I certainly remember the build-up to it. And of course, the really big thing about it was there was going to be a civilian on the mission, and she was a school teacher, so there was a lot of press about that.
Krista McAuliffe.
Yeah. So, actually, one thing I was going to mention after our last discussion was that I did remember the call numbers for the station I used to watch Doctor Who on, which was CKVU.
Ah, it's CKVU 13.
Yes. And it used to show Doctor Who in its original half-hour installments. So they weren't all strung together, so you were watching them as they would have originally appeared on the BBC. And the first episode I ever saw was the final episode of a storyline called Inferno, which was the finale of John Pertwee's first season as the Third Doctor. And a very strange episode, I must say, to be introduced to Doctor Who with, because it involved a British sort of Nazi parallel universe and this amazing doctor who was in a velvet suit with a cape, and modern mod Britain with all these mod people with their shag haircuts and their mini skirts and their bell-bottom pants, and of course a mad scientist turning into a werewolf. And that was a lot to pile into a 22-minute episode.
I never saw the CKVU airings because I was in Kelowna, and we didn't have KVOS there either. So I only ever saw the omnibus, 3 to 4 hour versions until YTV started showing it. I remember my roommate was saying that TV Ontario used to show the Pertwee Doctor Who's, and that's where he saw them. So they probably were the same syndication packages that you saw on View 13.
do have the knack of sensing people's weaknesses. By the way, have you heard that Augusta is now working for us? Where? At that Hartley Boys Casino.
It's Wednesday, January 29th, 1986, and we have watched episode 382 of Santa Barbara. Sophia and Lionel cruise up to Carmel. After a rousing game of Trivial Pursuit and some reminiscences of when they met, they kiss. So they didn't call it Trivial Pursuit. They called it a trivia game. I don't know if they thought there was a copyright issue, but a very distinctive board and pieces and questions. So Lionel actually made up his own questions for Sophia to answer about their past. At the Orient Express, Dylan is surprised that Kelly is not in New York. Well, that makes up for the time that she was surprised that he hadn't left town too. She tells him that her dad forced her to stay in town to oversee the casino, which, as you can imagine, is a little disturbing to him because he's overseeing the casino. So annoyed, he hires Augusta Lockridge. Kelly tells Brick that Dylan hired Augusta, and Brick tells Amy, and Amy asks Brick if he's planning something. And he says, yes, but it's not what they think. So I'll be interested to see what Brick has planned for the Capwells and Lockridges.
And it sounds like it's not going to be, everyone's, we've heard a lot about Gina and her threats to take away what people love the most. And it sounds like Brick's been kind of gaming everyone and trying to figure out what they care about and, is going to do something that maybe they would not foresee him doing. So that'll be really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Everyone heads to the casino. And unlike yesterday, when it was just an old abandoned oil rig, suddenly it's actually basically a completely remodeled casino. We see a lot of close-ups. I guess they don't want to show us the grandeur of it until the opening. But we can see where people will come in at the back. It seems to be a little raised, fairly small doorway, beige wall there. But I suspect it's 1 or 2 steps down to come in. The implication is you're coming from some sort of mooring area at that point. And that's pretty much all we see. I think they're hanging around either around a table or a bar where they do most of the discussion. So we don't see too much of the decor. But, looking around at the oil rig in the last few days, I'm like, that's not very big. Is the casino actually going to be very big, or are they going to cheat it and just show us 2 corners? I mean, if it's not at least as big as the Orient Express, it'll be obviously small.
And it reminded me, we've talked a little bit about Doctor Who, and we got a DVD of the animated version of Fury from the Deep, and one of the extras was some of the cast members going back and visiting now this wasn't an oil rig that they had actually filmed the original series on, but it was sort of similar. And just the state of disrepair, the fact that they could barely even get onto the thing safely, and I think they had to sign a whole bunch of waivers and that to film their little documentary, just tells you really the sad state that this thing is actually in.
And I think they had filmed there in the 60s, and it had been built for the war. I think it might have had anti-aircraft guns or something on it. And while they were there, I guess the director or whoever, maybe the location scout, realized that they probably hadn't gotten permits to film there in the 60s because it was already so derelict, just 20 years after the war. So. Well, Kelly phones Cece, or Cece phones Kelly from the oil rig, and, she promptly tells him that Dylan hired Augusta Lockridge, and he forces Dylan to come to the mansion on pain of having all of his funding pulled. Kelly urges him to bring some documentation, because it's clear he's going to have to tap dance for his supper in front of Cece, but Dylan says he'll wing it. At the mansion, Cece tells Dylan he knows all about his past, and he lists through all his dodgy ventures, including all of his bilking Nick out of his money, failed attempts at going to school in the Caribbean. And he basically says that Dylan's not fit to run anything, and he's canceling the project. So, in a commercial break, clearly some scrambling has been done because Brick and Amy show up with some folders and supporting documents, and Cece is about to do a press conference, so he gives them basically 3 minutes to try and make a pitch. And Dylan shows him a bunch of projections and all the money he saved by I think was it the equipment that he got for like 25%, or the decor they got cheap, and he points out that he did all the electrical work himself. So once again, I really think that place is going to go up in flames.
Yes, I mean, couple that with what we've already discussed today and in previous discussions about how derelict this oil rig probably is. I think, I don't think this is going to be a very safe place to be.
I think it made me think about this week about how on Another World they had so many restaurants. Like, people were constantly opening restaurants on that show. And I sort of have a vague memory that the way they, got rid of the previous restaurant was they would usually burn it down. So it's a fairly common thing, I think, on soaps to have a set for a few months. Probably years is more like it. And then when they tire of it, they've got to give the character an excuse to stop hanging out at the hangout. And so they burn it down. And then that gives everyone a chance to refresh and reposition. So I imagine they're already sowing the seeds of that because they have a certain number of months in line for this story, and they can't constantly have everyone ferrying their way out. It's worth noting that I think it was Kelly who said that all of the people on Dylan's list, the high rollers, etc., that Augusta was going to bring in, really that would only bring in people for about a month or so before they got tired of it. So they're already sowing seeds of maybe business, turning down after a couple of months. So anyway, Cece tells Dylan, just make sure you open on time. So he was swayed by Dylan's song and dance routine.
Now, one of the things I thought was quite interesting about this scene, and I don't know if it will lead into anything or not, but I kind of took note of it, was that Dylan insists that Brick come to this meeting with Cece, and Brick does not want to come, and Dylan insists. And then Brick says something at the end of it like, I never want to come to this house again. But I sort of felt like Cece was kind of looking at Brick a little bit, because Brick is the one who would have come up with a lot of the numbers and that. And I'm almost wondering if it's kind of clicking through Cece's head a little bit that Brick is probably pretty good at what he does, and maybe this is someone, I don't know, maybe he's just filing it in the back of his head, but that this is someone who could maybe run a business.
If he could make Brick a member of a Capwell Industries, he'd be taking Lionel's son away from him just the way Lionel took his son away from him.
And he, because Ted's never really shown much interest or acumen for the business, and he's constantly on the outs with him. Of course, he's on the outs with him right now. And Kelly isn't really a business person, and we know that Eden has made some mistakes. And, I'm sort of wondering a little bit about that back and forth too, where Cece keeps saying to Eden, no, it doesn't matter, you've made these mistakes. But I think he is aware that she has made some mistakes. So it just wouldn't surprise me if he's kind of keeping his eye out for other talent, and if it could be taking something away from Lionel or throwing up a little bit of drama there. I don't know if he would mind doing that.
We see Mary bringing Cece his toast in the morning, so she's, not just a nurse, but also a maid now. Cece calls for Mason, and he is upset with Mason for having brought Brick to the house yesterday for his own amusement, and Cece tells Mason to pack his bags and get out of the mansion. Mark shows up to take Mary apartment hunting, and Cece says, why don't you just move into the guest house? It's empty. And after checking it out, Mary agrees. Then Mike invites Mary to the big bash for the casino opening next week. So now we have a definite time frame for the big bash we all predicted for New Year's Eve. That's actually coming in mid-February, I guess. And, of course, Mason has to throw in some comment about the gambling ex-nun. Cece finally visits Minx. I think it was 10:30 was the meeting, and I noticed some of these scenes on the yacht showed 10:25, so I thought, okay, we're getting there. She is, of course, with Warren, and even with Warren there, she seems a little bit frightened, based on how Cece treated Lionel last time. And, of course, he is livid that he stole her grandson, that she stole his grandson, and Minx says she should be blaming Sophia. And Cece says that he holds all the Lockridges accountable. Minx says that she protected Brick from being raised by Cece, and that when he found out Channing wasn't his, all his love turned to hate. And she says, how your father would have been proud of you. So that's an interesting thing. We got a little Santa Barbara history and a very not surprising evaluation of Cece's father. I mean, just from what we know about the Capwells, it's not a shocker.
Yeah.
That's the kind of person he was. Warren tells Cece that Lionel and Sophia are together on the Lockridge yacht. I think he thought that someone should trump Cece in this conversation at some point. And Cece leaves, and that makes us a little worried.
Yeah.
She knows what Cece could do. In fact, on the yacht, Lionel, Sophia warns Lionel that they're both in danger from Cece. As Mason is leaving the mansion with his suitcases, Cece suggests there might be something he could do that might... he just suggests there might be something he could do, and Mason says, you mean, and then you'd forgive me? He goes, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying there's something you might do. So, he mentions a couple things that Mason doesn't want to do, and then Cece comes up with another one. He says, I want you to make sure that Augusta leaves Lionel, so the Lockridge's finances will be cut in half by her divorce settlement. He says he plans to destroy each and every one of the Lockridges. And Mason declines, once again. But the next thing you know, he's at the Orient Express, and he sees Augusta at the bar, and sidles up to her and orders her a martini.
There were two things that stood out to me in that conversation. The first is that Cece is suddenly worried about divorce law and community property after throwing Gina out with nothing and saying she'll never have anything. So he clearly is aware that Gina could actually, I would think, be quite a threat to his estate if they do go forward with the divorce. The other thing that occurred to me, I think he's right that, if he wanted revenge, he could definitely encourage this divorce and ruin Lionel, and that would be great. But it did occur to me that this could be part of his revenge on Mason as well, because if Mason gets into some sort of apparent affair with Augusta, that's going to end his prospects with Mary.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking maybe yesterday, that somehow he's going to try to come between Mary and I don't know. He almost seemed to be contemplating Mary as a potential love interest for himself yesterday at one point.
He's definitely feeling much more tenderly towards Mary, and I do think he genuinely doesn't think that Mason will be good for her. I do give him that. But so it occurred to me that this, and as you say, doesn't actually promise Mason anything. So I think this could allow him to screw over the Lockridges. It could get Mary away from Mason, and it could be a nice little bit of revenge on Mason as well.
He says to Mason, you have a knack of sensing people's weaknesses, and which Mason says not really a compliment. And then Mason says, if I bring home the Golden Fleece, my position will be secure. And then Cece says, life has no promises, only opportunities. So that's the way he put it. So really, he's dangling something in front of Mason that is made of smoke, and Mason knows it. So. And he when he mentions to Mason that Augusta's working at the Hartley Brothers Casino. So that's kind of a fun nickname for that place.
Now, a fun thing would be if Mason is actually that aware of this and tries to go in on Augusta with some kind of revenge back or something.
Mm.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if Mason's main purpose now would be revenge against Cece or trying to get back into Cece's good graces. Could go either way. So now we have Cece destroying all the Lockridges and Gina destroying all the Capwells. So this could be a fun few months.
And no one knowing quite what to do with Brick. Everyone being very suspicious of him. And not, certainly Cece and Augusta are very suspicious of him. But they don't quite know what to do with him. They think he might be a piece. I think both of them are seeing him as a piece that could potentially be a wild card.
Well, we had credits this episode. Last time we had credits was episode 378, in which we saw Dr. Reston's final credit. And today we have all the normal cast members and Orient Express bartender David Lane Baker. So I don't know how long we'll be seeing him. I know we saw that State Street Bistro bartender for quite a while. But this could be a one-off, or maybe we'll see the same guy regularly from time to time. And that is it. Anything else you have to add?
Not that I can think of right now.
Just that we're now off by one episode because of the Challenger explosion being not a planned day off. So luckily they didn't skip a next episode. They just bumped it to the next day. So we'll be having some Thursday episodes airing on a Friday for a little while. So the cliffhangers will be on Mondays for the next little while. Either way, it would have been annoying to me because Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays would have been the days when I had the most classes. So anyway, we will be back after we've watched episode 383 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
And here are the papers on the electrical work. I did most of it myself.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 383 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Thursday, January 30th, 1986. Already approaching the end of January. In real-time news, we watched an episode of Policewoman, and Paula Kelly, Ginger Jones, was on it as a madam. So she's a bit typecast. We also saw a still photo of Jack Carter in the recent Bill Cosby documentary. So if you're a fan of Bill Cosby or Santa Barbara, you might want to watch that. And there's a new show starting called Minx. I don't think it's about Minx Lockridge, though. Back in Santa Barbara, Lionel and Sophia are kissing on the yacht. And Sophia says this is not going to make them happy. And then she asks if maybe he's only interested in her to get back at Cece. Of course, we all know that's not the case with Lionel, but he says, what man could resist crushing his enemy? No. What man could resist crushing his greatest enemy? They kiss. Cece tells someone to make sure the Lockridge yacht has a very special homecoming. I don't know if he's planning to have Lionel arrested for something that he's been keeping in his back pocket.
Yeah, I can't imagine quite what it would be if it's someone there to, I don't know, escort Sophia somewhere. I mean, she's already been bounced off the Capwell property. It's hard to know what CC necessarily has in mind. He's already had Sophia thrown off the property, basically. So whether he is thinking of having someone meet the yacht to, I don't know, what else could he do? Freeze her assets, maybe? I mean, she's got a lot of her own money in that from Marcello's side of the family, so that wouldn't really, I think, affect that. I don't know. I don't know if he's planning to have a bunch of thugs there to beat up Lionel. Who knows?
Cece, meanwhile, is holding a press conference in the atrium, and Kirk happens by, and Cece pulls him on camera and tells everyone that he's not stepping down, and introduces his amazing son-in-law.
I think he might eat those words in the not-too-distant future.
Oh, we got the February sweeps coming up. In fact, it probably even started already. A reporter says, wasn't she engaged to Cruz Castillo? But that's kind of lost in the hubbub of things, and Cece basically ends the press conference right around then. He and Kirk are not done. They go to the Orient Express for lunch. And Cece spots Mason with Augusta at the next table and says, I can see the vultures are having lunch today. And he asks Kirk to bring Gina some money for Brandon. This is handy because Kirk probably will be visiting Gina from time to time at the motel, so now he's got an excuse. Mason tries to tell Augusta that they have a lot in common, but she's not necessarily buying it, but she's happy that someone's buying her an expensive lunch. Mason spots Cece and goes over to his table, and he starts putting on a southern accent. Well, hi, Big Daddy, how's tricks? Cece says, get your hands off my table. Mason pretends not to remember who Kirk is, and Cece threatens to have him thrown out of the restaurant. Later, he tells Mason it looks like he's making progress with Augusta. I think Mason still tries to backpedal on the fact that he's actually doing anything for Cece. Cece says it wouldn't mean a great deal to me if we destroy the Lockridges, with Augusta's help if need be. Mason says it doesn't make sense to kick me out if you try to lure me back. And then Mary arrives for lunch with Cece. This kind of throws off Mason a bit. Brandon tells Gina that someone followed him home from school. Kirk arrives with the money, and Gina asks him if Cece is having Brandon followed. And Kirk says Cece would have told him. So Gina goes out, leaving Kirk to babysit Brandon. Gina accuses of Santana of being the one who hired someone to follow Brandon, and Santana says it wasn't her. So Gina asks Cruz to look into it. Mason finds Kirk babysitting Brandon. And Kirk tries to pass Brandon over to him so he can finally get on with his day. Just then Gina returns home, and she asks Mason to handle her divorce case. And Mason says that Gina and Cece are the two people he hates the most in the world.
And yet they both are always coming to Mason to ask him for stuff. So that's a weird sort of relationship right there.
So with Jack Stanfield Lee out of town, that leaves Julia in the lawyer front, I think.
We had so many lawyers for the longest time. Lindsay, I guess, has left Santa Barbara, so he's not in the mix either.
Yeah.
If Kirk had gone into law,
instead of
we
business,
would have some interesting, perhaps, courtroom confrontations possible with him and Mason or him and Julia.
I feel like the writers, when they had the opportunity to swap out Kirk for Jack, maybe had already had that discussion that we have too many lawyers in town. So yeah, I suspect we'll see Julia actually have a little storyline.
That would be nice. We haven't seen her for a while, actually.
Fighting the Capwells, too. A nice Lockridge thing to do. Augusta tells Cece how well he looks, and she says, there we all were, trying to think of something nice to say at your funeral, and now we don't have to bother. My husband and your ex-wife are on the high seas together. She thinks Cece should be a bit more concerned about it. He says he's got self-control. You should try it. And Augusta says, I think your illness has softened you. And Cece says, please don't count on that. And Lionel better not either. So this is another little hint into that he has something planned for Lionel when he gets off that yacht. And then Mary arrives for her lunch with Cece. And he tells her she's an extraordinary woman. Too good for Mason. Mason pops by the Capwell mansion later to pick up some files, and Mary tells him that she's moved into the guest house. He kisses her briefly, and Cece makes another call to his guy who's got an eye on the yacht, and then he gets into a bit of a rage, thinking that he looks too weak for his enemies, and he snaps his cane over his knee. Says that he needs to have a strong, that he needs to look strong.
So Augusta kind of got to him a little bit, I think.
Hmm. And he did then subsequently walk up the stairs, and I saw he was holding on to what really, I think we discussed this, there's not really a banister on those stairs, because I think we were worried when he was coming down them, that first time after his coma, that he didn't have anything to hold on to. And so there's basically just tile on the side, too, which I think is holding like the edge of a planter, if I'm not mistaken, because there's some leaves sort of blocking the view of that. So he was kind of a couple times grabbing onto that, which of course is all acting on Jed Allen's part. So this may just be a way to get rid of that cane so they can move on like they did after the earthquake. But maybe it's going to be part of the, the plot of Cece's revenge and everything else to look strong. We had credits again so soon after yesterday. Brandon Call, of course, was in the credits today. Bartender was not. And Private Eye, Joe George, was in the credits. And we did note there was some interesting... Now, I don't know if it's just the version of the episode that we have that may have been cobbled together from different sources. But at one point, Kirk was in the hotel room with Gina and having lunch with Cece at the exact same time.
Yes, Kirk was in a lot of places at once.
So I don't know if someone misedited this at home, or my other thing that I thought of is maybe they did cobble something together after the preemption on Tuesday, and that they actually made one episode out of two, the Tuesday and Wednesday ones, and that's why all of Kirk's scenes ended up being the bulk of the episode, although we did have a lot of other scenes there. But maybe they re-edited or maybe they re-edited the 4 episodes in the week, the remaining 3 episodes in the week, so they could have a bit of a cliffhanger Friday. I don't know. We'll see when we watch Fridays how cliffhangery it is.
Yeah, I think that's possible, because usually when they have actors there, they'll try and use them a certain amount during the episode, and we really didn't see all that much of Cruz, certainly in comparison to Kirk.
And Lionel and Sophia only had 2 scenes. So yeah, maybe they pulled those apart and ended up getting stuck with Kirk in 2 different scenes at the same time. So we'll see how Friday hangs together. If it ends on a cliffhanger, then we'll know that that's what they did. But I don't know how important cliffhangers are compared to the cost of an episode. I think, it's quite expensive to shoot a show and just to waste one like that. But then again, it is sweeps, and maybe the network said, oh no, we got to have these Friday cliffhangers line up properly. It's worth it. Maybe it was someone else's call. I don't know. We'll see if there's any other weird juxtapositions or people who, look like a scene has been pulled from one episode into the other, or they only have one scene and, it's unlikely they would have written it that way. All right. Well, we'll be back after we watch the Friday episode 384. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
It's Friday, January 31st, 1986, and we've watched episode 384 of Santa Barbara. And the casino opens tomorrow. So if this had been a Thursday episode, then tomorrow would have been Friday. So I suspect we are still a day off due to the Tuesday's preemption, even though I did think the scenes in this episode also seem to be hatcheted in a weird way. I mean, Kelly and Dylan had some scenes that were like 12 seconds long, and I'm like, did they chop those up to, remove a whole day from the last 3 episodes? But there wasn't really a cliffhanger, so maybe tomorrow will be a big reveal on the casino. Kelly is having a press conference at the casino, and a reporter asks her about her engagement ring. And when she says no comment, Nick asks her who she wants, him or his brother. He says, I feel that you half hope that I'm going to become a swashbuckler and an adventurer. And then he says that he can't marry her. Kelly tells Eden she slept with Dylan, and Eden asks her if she loves Nick, and she says yes. And she asks her if she loves Dylan. She says no! Kelly tells Dylan she plans to tell Nick about what happened in Santa Rosa. Of course, Dylan is not on board with that plan.
What I find really interesting, I was actually really kind of cheering when Nick said, well, I don't think I really want to marry you after all. And this is so completely outside of Kelly's experience, I think. And I just find it really interesting that she still feels that she's the one who controls the narrative on this. Which, given she's the star of the soap opera, maybe she does. But in real life, I think often when someone says they don't want to marry you anymore, that's a pretty good indication of how they feel.
Mm-hmm. Sophia calls Ted and tells him that they're about to dock in Monterey. She tells Lionel the whole trip was a mistake and arranges to fly back to Santa Barbara rather than cruise back down in the yacht. Sophia shows Ted the new apartment that Lionel found for her. And so doesn't look that different from the apartment she had before when she and Marcello were hanging out there. But I guess it's different. One little room so far that we've seen.
Seems very furnished.
Seems smaller than some of the others that she's had. Eden also visits, so this new address got around very quickly.
Much faster than our new address did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we still got one Christmas card at the wrong address. Sophia tells Eden she's not going to see Lionel ever again. If she ever runs into him, it'll be by accident. But she won't be pursuing Cece either. Lionel arrives, so he got her new address. Oh, I guess he knew because
he would know because he's the one who got it.
To invite her to attend the casino opening with him. She says she's going alone for Eden. Lionel says she can never escape him.
I feel like that's not going to go over very well with Augusta.
Mm-hmm. Augusta will be working there. Cece will be hanging around. Lionel and Sophia will accidentally show up on the same boat.
Brick will be there, but he's kind of mad at everybody right now, so...
And he's working.
I wouldn't be surprised if Warren shows up, maybe partly to support his mother, but also remember he runs a newspaper, so this would be a big thing in Santa Barbara, so I'm sure he'll be covering it. So there's all kinds of potential tensions just in this one storyline.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully we'll see a bit more of the casino, because those people will all be crammed in that little doorway that we've only seen so far. Santana tells Rosa she's thinking of telling Cruz she's pregnant so that he'll marry her. Rosa obviously doesn't think this is a good idea. And then later she tells Cruz that it's over between them because she got so desperate that she thought of telling him that she was pregnant so he'd marry her.
So this is a big day for characters who've been kind of taken for granted to stand up and say they're not going to take it anymore. And I was kind of, just as I was cheering on Nick, I was kind of cheering on Santana as well, because Cruz is very much been controlling the narrative of that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Eden is showing Cece some quarterly projections. As you might guess, it's at the wicker table, and he's pretty pleased with that. And he says that Kirk takes after Jack. So at some point, Cece has been told that Kirk Cranston is Jack Stanfield-Lee's son, and that's probably cemented things even more in Cece's mind, that this is a good match.
Yeah, I think so. And in some ways it's a little bit too bad we saw, that apparently happened off camera.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's possible maybe Cece knew that Jack had some family as well.
Mm.
I don't know how far their relationship goes back and if this is something that was being, he wouldn't necessarily know it was Kirk, but maybe he wasn't completely surprised that Jack had some family. At any rate, I'm sure, as you say, this will cement their relationship even more.
Mm-hmm. We'll have Kirk cemented into the family for years to come.
Mm-hmm.
Cece also tells Eden she's not facing the truth about Cruz, because she's kind of hand-waving things a little bit about how she feels about Cruz and vice versa. Eden gives Kirk an expensive car, and they go for a drive. And they said the name of that car, but it's not one I recognize. So I don't know if they made something up or if it's just such an obscure car that I've never heard of it.
Yeah, we both kind of looked at each other and wondered what it was, but we're not car people, so...
It wasn't a Honda Civic.
No. Maybe keep doing a bit of research on that. We're still trying to find out how to spell it.
Gina calls Kirk on his new car phone. And then when he calls her back later, she says, it's urgent that they meet. And Kirk says, why is everything in your life such a crisis? Gina says, bring the new car. So somehow Gina knows about the new car, just like everyone knows about Sophia's new address.
Remember, this is pre-internet and pre-cell phones, so...
Gina tells Kirk that she's prepared to spill everything unless he gives her some money and a couple of one-way tickets out of town. And he suggests Atlantic City. I think he's realizing that everyone would be better off with Gina out of town at this point. They shake on the deal. Kirk returns with the tickets and $500 cash, which Gina is offended by. But he says he's wired ahead another $5,000 to a bank in Atlantic City that she can withdraw when she gets there. And Gina immediately tries to return the tickets for cash at the travel agency. But because they were bought on credit cards, he will not exchange them for her. So she's out of luck there.
I was actually really kind of interested in this whole thing because it was just at Christmas when Gina was forced by Cruz and Mason to sign this agreement that she would never, never, ever, ever leave Santa Barbara with Brandon. And now in less than 6 weeks, we've done a complete turnaround and everyone's trying to get her out of town. Mm-hmm. So apparently that agreement didn't mean very much legally or any other way.
Remember Cece said all agreements are null and void?
Yeah.
Kirk says, well, if you're not leaving, I want that $500 back. Gina says, I wouldn't leave for $1 million. I'm not finished with Cece. I want to move back to the Campwell mansion. I'm here to protect Brandon's interests. And Kirk says, well, you've lost me now. Don't even bother calling me because I won't answer. Gina says, you are going to do anything I want or you'll lose everything. So she's still willing to risk, revealing herself to, trump someone else. So
I've been really feeling like these threats that Gina and Kirk are making against each other, honestly, neither of them really are very credible. I don't think Gina really has a lot of credible leverage on Kirk at this point because she doesn't, it's not, as I say, this is pre-internet, pre-everything. It's not like there's video footage showing Eden pulling the plug. So, she doesn't have a lot of credibility with CC, really. And Kirk's now getting himself very insulated in the family, so I'm wondering really how much of a threat Gina is to him. Mm-hmm. And how much of a threat really is Kirk to Gina. Yeah,
really, they would just kind of blow each other up at the same time.
So I feel like this alliance, I think, is real, and they're great characters to be allied together. I just think the thread that's binding them is a little bit weak at this point.
Mm-hmm. Cruz borrows a telephoto lens from Nick so that he can spy on Kirk. And Pearl tags along as Cruz spies on Kirk and Eden on their drive. Pearl says, poetic injustice. Do you think Eden bought it for him? They spy on Kirk and Gina at the motel. Pearl assumes they're just having an affair. Then Cruz finds out about the one-way plane tickets to Atlantic City.
Now, I was trying to remember, and I think we discussed it very briefly, just whether Atlantic City was a thing at this point in the 80s. Because I think later in the 80s, there was, a lot of attention being paid to Atlantic City when Donald Trump and his first wife opened this big casino in Atlantic City, and they were going to revive it, and it was, this big thing. But I feel like that was a little later on. So
I guess we could research that. Mm-hmm. It's past Boardwalk Empire, I know that. Cece is told that the Lockridge yacht is coming back to Santa Barbara without Sophia. Cece, Eden, and Kirk dine at the Orient Express. And Kirk gives Cece some research he's done on Lionel's financial holdings. Kirk says he does not have the best business sense. Cece says, I want you to find a weak spot. Mason found one about a year ago. See if you can do better. And get Lionel out of that casino project. So several things now that he's entrusted Kirk to do. So,
Now, do you think Cece knows that Brick has been actually managing all of Lionel's stuff for the last year or so?
I don't know.
Because that's been the whole thing between Lionel and Brick up to this point, is that Brick was the one taking over control of the Lockridge stuff.
I don't know. I wonder if that'll come out, since everyone's going to be hanging out together at a casino for the foreseeable future. Eden tells Cece that Sophia is not going to see Lionel anymore. Cece says, experience tells me you can never depend on what your mother says. And I want this subject closed. So Eden's still hoping they're going to get back together, which is interesting because she was so anti-Sophia for so long. Cruz arrives and tells Eden, you've got a surprise in store for you. I just want you to know that it's coming. Now, I was a bit confused about this. He spent all day following Kirk, so presumably it's something about Kirk. Presumably he thinks that maybe he can show Eden that she didn't pull the plug somehow.
That's what I was thinking, but
he's nowhere near getting that.
We haven't seen new evidence, really. No. Santana came closest, actually, and Cruz just kind of blew that off, or he apparently seemed to. So I'm not quite sure what he's going to lay out for Eden. I feel like it'll be quite circumstantial because we haven't, as you say, seen him really gather a lot of extra evidence that would seem to support that. But
yeah, I'm not sure how soon that will pay off. I mean, will they just tease her with that, or will this conversation continue?
Unless they magically, I mean, didn't they have, wasn't there a whole thing with the dress at one point?
Cruz has the dress, right?
I mean, unless he's magically figured out that it's,
that's the wrong size.
Yeah.
Maybe the next time we see them finish this conversation, they'll all be dressed up at Nick's place. So
now, in fairness, this version of Gina is actually probably closer to Eden's size than the first one.
That's
so
true.
Maybe that's kind of been nullified depending on which version of Gina we're going with.
Yeah, that's an interesting twist to the evidence. That is it for this episode and for the week. And 1986 in Vancouver, there was a World Exposition, Expo 86. And so around this time, everyone in my age group was applying to get a job at Expo, which would be great so I could stick around in Vancouver over the summer. So we'll keep you posted on the job search as we approach summer of 86. But right now, we've wrapped up January, and we'll be back next week for our February 3rd episode as we start week 80 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
But I'll never trust a man who carries a trench coat in his trunk.